All right. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe even good evening, depending upon where you're at. I'll hang out here for a couple of moments while we wait for folks to join. By way of introduction, my name is Theresa Larson. I lead the team here at MindfulnessRx, and today we are going to be talking a little bit about mindfulness and some of the things that we have coming up in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. We're specifically doing something around mindfulness and creating an experience for that. So we'll, as folks come in, we will we'll hold off on really getting into the meat. Usually we wait about 2 minutes or so to get moving. But I thank everybody who's joining us here on the webinar as well as on YouTube. So when, again, my name is Theresa Larson. I lead the team here at MindfulnessRx. We have been integrating mindfulness into our musculoskeletal health practice for the last 5 or 6 years, I'd have to say. Recognizing that there's a brain-body connection. And so from our standpoint as clinical specialists on the musculoskeletal health side, as well as the fitness side, we know that mindfulness has an impact on the outcomes we see in our clinics. We also know vice versa, that focusing on physical mindfulness, movement mindfulness impacts emotions, impacts anxiety, impacts a variety of things that eventually lead to better emotional health. And so the concept of mindfulness has really gotten a boost, especially since the pandemic started over a year ago. There had been trends, and I'll talk to those trends here in a sec, showing that mindfulness, just looking at downloads of apps like Calm or Headspace, had been growing pretty rapidly, indicating that mindfulness is something that is increasingly becoming part of the lexicon of normal self-care life, at least here in the States and certainly abroad as well. It's interesting as I talk to folks around the world from things I've done in my past life. Western countries, the US and Europe, mindfulness is something very popular. In a place like Brazil, for example, they're just starting to get into it, but I think that they'll, like many things, they'll catch up in terms of catch up to the level of interest that we have here in the States to such things. All that said is that mindfulness is increasingly becoming something that's important around the globe as our daily lives become probably more stressful than previous generations may have experienced for a number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this conversation. So let's talk about the importance of mindfulness and how to nail it. And so first of all, it's probably helpful to define it. So when we think of mindfulness here, there's a couple of components. There's the awareness, just awareness of how we're feeling, where we're at, our biases, our responses, our triggers, and then the acceptance. And so a lovely word, it's a big word, but it's a great word, is equanimity. And so being in a place where you can accept what is happening and be balanced, that's the EQU part of that word, balanced in our response to those things. And so we know that mindfulness is directly attributed to improving mental health. And speaking of mental health, there's a study came out recently that showed that 46% of US employees report struggling with mental health during this pandemic. There's a variety of definitions of what struggling is and to what level. Again, beyond the scope of this conversation, but what was interesting in that is that it breaks down by generation, and there's a wide degree of response rates based on age. So 22% of baby boomers reported struggling with mental health, 36% of Gen X, which is my generation, 59% of millennials, and 71% of Gen Z. So from 22 on the low end for baby boomers up to 71% of Gen Z. And there's a lot of stories around why older folks do or don't, why younger folks do or don't. Again, won't get into those here, but those stats are there to say, yes, it is increasingly a challenge, and we're increasingly aware of the challenge for ourselves as well as for our workforce. And so when we think about how to apply mindfulness, it's an analogy to a repetitive skill. So I'm a simple guy. I played quarterback for a long period of time. So throwing a ball, I create an analogy to that where I got coaching guidance, guided reps, the correction on mechanics, the correction on all types of things, the self-practice, and then the game time. What happens in a game? Am I putting those things into play when live fire is coming at me? Am I aware enough to understand what my next sequence of events should be? Are my mechanics ingrained enough where I don't have to think about the repetition? And mindfulness is very similar to that. It's a skill that takes reps to get good at. So there are tons of apps out there. And so I think lots of folks are aware of the apps that are available, but they have pros and cons, right? So there's tons of enormous growth. So after Bitcoin, I think mindfulness apps are probably one of the fastest growing things that you can find. So it's expected the revenue from app providers is expected to grow 40% year over year for the next 7 years. That's incredible growth in the scheme of things. The apps, easy access, great interfaces, they're improving all the time, but they do miss a few things. And so primarily, it's building a habit through accountability to a human versus a device. And so I look at this as apps are great at hand holding, not so good at skill building. Apps also often miss engaging with a real tribe of support. I know that they have groups and there's opportunities to do this with other folks, but having actual connection is something that we hear a lot from folks about what apps are missing when it comes to mindfulness. They also miss oftentimes the chance to leverage the physical body's central role in finding sustained calm, which is what mindfulness is all about. And also it misses the opportunity to really tap in, providing some methods to tap into some of the deep sources of our emotions and our frenzy. So, for example, awareness of the stories that we have. So we all have biases. We tell ourselves that I am this way, she is that way, I can't do that. There's so many stories that we tell ourselves that are not necessarily true, but becoming aware of those is important. And through an app, sometimes that's difficult. The disconnect between brain and body, which I alluded to at the beginning, the app doesn't necessarily help that. Listening without fixing, and men, this applies to all of us, especially. Action bias isn't necessarily a good thing. Having to solve something right now, having to deal with it right now is not necessarily a good thing. And apps struggle, I think, to provide some guidance there. Distractions, having the courage and awareness to process difficult emotions, being at peace with pain, overcoming doubt, alleviating anxiety, and kind of getting out of the discomfort with being present in the now. I think oftentimes apps miss those. So in response to those gaps and kind of thinking about what we hear from our clinical patients, from corporate wellness groups, and from consumers that we work with on our platform, is that we teamed up with a mindfulness educator with a very unique story to create an experiential self-care offering, which will be launching in May. So we're calling it the 21-day mindfulness experience. Don't call us, we're not the greatest branding folks here. Sometimes you just need to call it something, call it what it is. So 21 days of mindfulness experiences. And so the guides are led by John Macaskill, who's a retired Navy SEAL commander. And so he spent time in Somalia, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, great places, as a Navy SEAL commander. And I think while the life of a Navy SEAL commander has been glorified through books and movies, there's an unseen truth behind the scenes. So there's tremendous loss, grief and shame, stress, post-traumatic stress, not talking about the physical wounds that might be that you pick up along the way. That's just a starting list of the tolls that kind of career takes. And so John struggled with that for years. And while he was still in the Navy, it was suggested that he try mindfulness. And as you might expect, I think we think of SEALs as gung-ho macho men. He probably had that response of like, he laughed. He laughed at the prospect that mindfulness was going to help him. But over time, he tried it fell off of it, tried it again, fell off of it, and over time built up the ability to practice and get good at it. And now his career post-Navy is actually teaching mindfulness around the country. And so we were pleased to be able to have the opportunity to create this experience with John. Alongside him it will be Dr. T. Many of you know her. She's got a story of dealing with an eating disorder and the anxiety, and it stems from a long history of having to win, achieve, and she's learned how to manage that dynamic in her own personal life through mindfulness. So the two of them, and the habits that they formed and the techniques that they use are applicable to us all. And so I'm going to share a little bit here about what the mindfulness experience is going to include. So bear with me. Trying to keep away from as much visual stimuli as possible. And so the mindfulness experience is going to include a handful of things, 8 elements to be precise. So there's we call it M2RX. It's Mindfulness and Movement RX workshop. So it's 90 minutes with Dr. T and John, the guides, running through the components of what the experience is going to be about, providing direct instruction and drills, providing the opportunity to ask questions, but more importantly, getting everybody the lift during a kickoff to get started and have the momentum and motivation to engage with the other components of the experience. We also are going to have the self-assessments, and so it's important in our minds, and we've seen this in the outcomes that we measure. There's a musculoskeletal awareness, and emotional awareness and capacity that we want to measure. And so we want to give everybody a starting point. And again, we'll measure these at the end to see progress. And I'm pretty confident that even though we're just focusing on mindfulness as an experience, that there will be a tremendous improvement, both in musculoskeletal health as well as emotional energy and capacity scores that people have. But that's part of this. And Dr. T will lead a live session at the kickoff of the experience to help people walk through this together. All these things will be recorded, of course. And then there's a challenge. So I think we're all familiar with challenges these days, but 21 days of guided mindfulness training with John. These will be pre-recorded, but it's supported by weekly checkpoints with him and with Theresa to talk through questions, share experiences, where you're getting stuck. We'll also have what we find is important is applied mindfulness sessions. So mindful eating. So Chef Nikki will be live to help talk through mindful eating. Dr. Megan will be live to help talk through mindful movement. And Coach Lindsay and Coach Ray will be available to talk live about mindful exercise. And so thinking about how to apply the components of the challenge into those domains of life to help reinforce the habits of being mindful. Of course, as a group, daily encouragement is important. So connection to a tribe live is a crucial part of making sure that these practices and techniques stick. We think about building habit and improving outcomes. Daily engagement is very important. And so we'll have, it'll be a Facebook group, but everybody has a chance to get in there, share, talk, listen to the degree that they want to participate. We'll have an award ceremony. We're human, so reinforcement and motivation is necessary to get through this. Again, it's not easy. Some of this is going to be some deep work, and so we want to make sure that there's something there to reward folks who are participating and engaging. But also, and we think of awards as a chance to reinforce the behavior and habits for the next phase of life, the next month, the next year, the next quarter, whatever it turns out to be. We don't want 21 days to be it for you if you're participating in the experience, but it has to be something that you take on through your life. And then there's a special bonus. So everybody who joins and participates gets access to all the components of what's on our platform. So it's live fitness classes, it's daily sessions on movement, mindfulness, and health. There are also chances to ask questions from a pain perspective, which is what oftentimes it is a trigger that leads to some of the anxiety and issues that we're seeing these days, that mindfulness is meant to help. But we know that we have to talk specifically about pain, and there are live sessions with our docs to talk through that as well. So those are the key, the 8 elements of the experience. The first cohort that we're going to have is going to start in May. Again, May is Mental Health Month. It's going to be Mindfulness May around here. The pricing for this is going to be incredibly reasonable. We haven't figured that out totally yet, but it's definitely going to be less than $100 for individuals. And then for companies, I think they'll be pleased as well with the pricing model that we're going to develop. So we will have information coming out through email, as well as our site, as well as social posts next week. But I wanted to at least give everybody here a chance to understand and hear what it's about up front. Hopefully get excited about it and join us when we do this come May. So I will, with that said, I will leave it open for questions here for the next minute. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we will drop off here shortly. I know that there was in talking with folks, there was a question about how this works. The way that it would be standard from a standpoint of how to register. We'll make it live next week, and you can register at any point before we actually launch. And we're going to do this as a cohort. We know that having a group run through something together improves the accountability. It improves our ability to drive better outcomes by everybody being on the same page and we're talking about the same topic. For everybody on a Tuesday, for example, if we're talking about meditating through pain, and not that it's all meditation, but that's a component of it, or if we're talking about alleviating anxiety, everybody's dealing with that on the same page. So if you have, we will be sending out links again through email to everybody shortly as this goes live next week. But for everybody who's joined us, I appreciate you taking the time today to learn about the 21-day mindfulness experience that we'll have